I was standing beneath a crystal chandelier with 300 guests watching me smile at my husband when my sister ripped the microphone from the DJ's hand and announced she was pregnant with his child. The ballroom went silent. My mother's champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered against the marble floor. My father actually grabbed the edge of the table to steady himself. Across the room, several of my army colleagues exchanged stunned looks. My husband turned pale. My sister smiled. She thought she had won. She thought she was about to destroy me in front of everyone I loved. What she didn't know was that I had spent 4 months preparing for that exact moment. What she didn't know was that the private investigator sitting near the back wall had already documented every lie. And what she definitely didn't know was that the baby she was talking about would become the final nail in the coffin of her own carefully constructed fantasy. I smiled, stood up, and calmly held out my hand for the microphone. "Perfect timing," I said. The expression on her face changed instantly, because for the first time in her life, Emily realized she wasn't controlling the story anymore. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and at 38 years old, I was a colonel in the United States Army. Most people assumed that 20 years in uniform had taught me how to handle combat situations. They were right. What nobody tells you is that military training doesn't prepare you for betrayal inside your own family. The celebration was supposed to mark my 10th wedding anniversary. My husband David and I had rented the grand ballroom of the Chesapeake Bay Resort in Maryland. White roses decorated every table. Soft jazz drifted through hidden speakers. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the water where the last golden rays of sunset reflected across the bay. It should have been a perfect evening. Looking back now, I suppose it was perfect. Just not for the reasons anyone expected. 4 hours earlier, I had stood in front of my bedroom mirror fastening a pair of pearl earrings while staring at my reflection. The woman looking back seemed calm, confident, composed. The same woman who had commanded soldiers in Afghanistan. The same woman who had briefed generals and testified before congressional committees. But beneath that calm exterior, a storm was already raging. Because I knew exactly what was coming. I had known for weeks. The warning signs had started months earlier. Long before the investigation. Long before the evidence. Long before the private investigator handed me a report thick enough to fill a binder. The truth was that Emily had spent most of her life wanting whatever belonged to me. She was 3 years younger than I was. Growing up in Ohio, we couldn't have been more different. I followed rules. Emily ignored them. I earned good grades. Emily relied on charm. I planned for the future. Emily lived entirely in the moment. Yet somehow she always managed to become the center of attention. At family gatherings, teachers praised my academic achievements. Then Emily would tell a funny story and everyone would laugh. At soccer games, I would score the winning goal. 10 minutes later, people would still be talking about something dramatic Emily had done in the parking lot. For years, I convinced myself it didn't bother me. Maybe it didn't. Not at first. Because despite our differences, I loved my sister. I defended her, protected her, covered for her mistakes. When she got suspended in high school, I helped her finish assignments. When she dropped out of college, I helped her rewrite her resume. When she couldn't pay rent, I quietly transferred money into her account. More times than I can remember. My parents never meant to play favorites, at least I don't think they did. But Emily always seemed to receive endless second chances. Sarah's responsible. Sarah can handle it. Sarah's strong. I heard those words my entire life. Eventually, people stop asking how strong people are feeling. They simply assume strength means you don't need support. I left home at 18 to attend West Point. Emily stayed behind. Over the next 2 decades, my military career took me across the world. Germany, South Korea, Afghanistan, Washington. The Army gave me purpose, structure, meaning. It also taught me something valuable. Patterns matter. Small details matter. People reveal themselves through behavior long before they reveal themselves through words. That lesson would eventually save me. I met David 12 years before the anniversary party. He was an aerospace engineer working with a defense contractor outside Washington. We met during a charity fundraiser supporting wounded veterans. He was intelligent without being arrogant, kind without being weak, confident without needing attention. For the first time in my life, I felt completely understood. We married 2 years later. The marriage wasn't perfect. No marriage is, but it was good, stable, comfortable, trustworthy. At least that's what I believed. Emily loved David from the moment she met him. At the time, I interpreted that as approval. She laughed at his jokes, texted him memes, included him in conversations. David seemed comfortable around her. Why wouldn't he be? She was my sister. For years, nothing appeared unusual. Then things started changing. Subtle changes. The kind most people miss. 3 years ago, Emily moved to Maryland after another failed relationship. I helped her find an apartment, helped her find a job, helped her settle into the area. The pattern repeated itself, just like always. At first, she visited occasionally, then weekly, then sometimes several times a week. David never complained. Actually, he seemed to enjoy her company. Again, nothing strange, until the small inconsistencies began appearing. Little things. David knowing details about Emily's schedule that I hadn't been told. Emily referencing conversations I didn't remember hearing. Inside jokes, shared stories, private smiles, tiny moments, harmless individually, suspicious collectively. One evening, 6 months before the anniversary party, I walked into our kitchen unexpectedly early after returning from a Pentagon meeting. David was standing near the island counter. Emily sat on a bar stool laughing. The conversation stopped immediately when I entered. Not paused. Stopped. The way conversations stop when people don't want you hearing the next sentence. For a moment, neither spoke. Then David smiled. "You're home early." It was a perfectly normal response. But something about the tension in the room lingered afterward. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. Trying to convince myself paranoia had no place in a healthy marriage. Trying to convince myself that my sister would never betray me. The problem was that my instincts rarely lied, and the Army had taught me never to ignore warning signs. Over the following months, the signs multiplied. Late-night text messages, unexpected absences, excuses that didn't quite align. Nothing definitive, nothing provable, but enough to make me uncomfortable, enough to make me start paying attention, enough to make me ask questions. Questions neither of them seemed eager to answer. Then 4 months before the anniversary celebration, something happened that changed everything. And that was the day I decided to hire a private investigator. What he discovered would eventually bring 300 guests to absolute silence and turn my sister's greatest moment of triumph into the worst mistake of her entire life. The first report from the private investigator arrived on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I was sitting alone in my office at Fort Meade when my secure email notification appeared. For several seconds, I simply stared at the screen. Part of me didn't want to open it, because as long as the report remained unread, there was still a chance I was wrong. There was still a chance my marriage was intact. There was still a chance my sister hadn't spent years pretending to love me while secretly destroying my life. Finally, I clicked. The document opened. 23 pages. Photographs. Dates. Locations. Observations. The first few pages appeared innocent enough. David and Emily meeting for coffee. David and Emily having lunch. David and Emily shopping together. Nothing criminal. Nothing romantic. Nothing definitive. But as I continued reading, a pattern emerged. The investigator had highlighted it in yellow. Meetings that occurred when I was out of town. Private dinners that neither had mentioned. Repeated visits to the same hotel outside Annapolis. My stomach tightened. I reached the final page. A photograph. David's car parked behind the Harbor View Inn at 10:43 p.m. Emily's car parked beside it. Neither vehicle leaving until after 3 a.m. I closed the file, then sat motionless. Outside my office window, rain streaked across the glass. For the first time in 20 years, I felt completely powerless. Not because of what they had done. Because of what I still hoped wasn't true. I wanted an explanation. A misunderstanding. A coincidence. Anything. But military service teaches you something uncomfortable. Facts don't care about hope. Evidence doesn't care about feelings. The next report arrived 6 days later. This one removed all doubt. The investigator had obtained photographs. Clear photographs. Painfully clear photographs. David kissing Emily outside a restaurant. David holding Emily's hand. David entering a hotel room with Emily. David leaving the same room the following morning. I stared at the images until the faces blurred. Then I placed the folder inside my desk drawer, locked it, and drove home. The entire trip took nearly an hour. I don't remember a single mile. When I walked through the front door, David was making dinner. The smell of garlic and rosemary filled the kitchen. Our golden retriever Liberty greeted me enthusiastically. Everything looked normal, comfortable, safe. David smiled. Long day. I looked at him, at the man I had trusted for more than a decade. The man who had slept beside me for 10 years. The man who had just spent the previous night in a hotel room with my sister. Yeah, I said quietly. Long day. He walked over and kissed my forehead. I nearly flinched. Not because I was angry. Because I suddenly realized I didn't know who he was anymore. That night after he fell asleep, I sat alone on the back patio. The Maryland air felt cool against my skin. Liberty rested beside my chair. The moon reflected across the water beyond our property. I thought about Emily, not the woman she had become, the little girl she used to be, the girl who climbed into my bed during thunderstorms, the girl who cried when neighborhood kids bullied her, the girl I defended more times than I could count. How had we arrived here? The answer came sooner than expected. The third investigative report contained something far worse than the affair itself. It revealed motive. Jealousy. Obsession. Years of resentment. The investigator had interviewed former co-workers, friends, and acquaintances. Several people described conversations with Emily. At first, the comments seemed harmless. Then the pattern emerged. One former co-worker reported hearing Emily say, "Sarah gets everything handed to her." Another remembered, "Everyone thinks she's perfect." A third statement stopped me cold. The woman recalled Emily drinking at a birthday party and saying, "Honestly, I should have had her life." Not wanted. Should have had. The distinction mattered. Because it wasn't about David. It had never been about David. The affair was only a symptom. What Emily truly wanted was to become me. The career, the marriage, the respect, the stability, the life she believed had been unfairly given to someone else. For years, she had compared her reality against mine. And instead of building her own happiness, she had decided to steal mine. That realization hurt more than the affair, because it transformed betrayal into something deeper, something older, something that had probably existed for decades. The investigator's next discovery confirmed it. Over the years, Emily had repeatedly told people that my success came easily, that military promotions were political, that I had been lucky, that everything always worked out for me. I laughed when I read that, not because it was funny, because it was absurd. Easy. Lucky. I remembered sleeping in desert tents, missing birthdays, missing holidays, missing funerals. I remembered 20-hour shifts, combat zones, friends who never came home. Nothing about my life had been easy. I earned every piece of it. Yet somehow Emily had convinced herself otherwise. The victim's story was easier than accountability. 3 weeks later, I received the largest report yet. 312 pages. Photographs. Financial records. Phone logs. Witness interviews. Hotel receipts. Text message screenshots. Everything. The affair had lasted nearly 11 months. 11 months, almost an entire year. Long enough for thousands of lies. Long enough for hundreds of opportunities to stop. Long enough for both of them to choose differently. Neither had. That evening, I sat alone in my car after leaving the investigator's office. The binder rested on the passenger seat. Heavy. Permanent. Undeniable. I cried harder than I had cried in years. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just silent tears sliding down my face. Because grief isn't always explosive. Sometimes it arrives quietly. Sometimes it simply sits beside you. I thought about divorce. About confrontation. About walking away immediately. Instead, I called the investigator. "There's something else," he said. His voice sounded hesitant. "What?" A pause. Then, "I believe your sister is planning something public." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "We intercepted information suggesting she intends to reveal the affair during your anniversary event." Silence. The words settled slowly. Public. 300 guests. Humiliation. Maximum damage, the investigator continued. "Based on what I've gathered, she wants everyone to know." I closed my eyes. For several seconds I said nothing. Then something unexpected happened. The sadness disappeared. Not completely, but enough. In its place came clarity. The same clarity that had carried me through difficult military decisions. The same clarity that appears when emotion stops clouding judgment. Emily wanted a stage. She wanted an audience. She wanted a moment where I looked weak, broken, defeated. For the first time in months, I smiled, because she had just made a mistake. A very large mistake. If Emily wanted a public performance, I would give her one. I wouldn't cancel the event. I wouldn't confront her. I wouldn't warn David. I would let them continue believing they were in control. Meanwhile, I would prepare every piece of evidence, every document, every witness, every fact. The investigator agreed to attend the celebration. Quietly, unnoticed, ready when needed. 3 days before the anniversary party, he delivered the final binder. I carried it into my office and placed it on my desk. More than 300 pages, enough evidence to destroy every lie they had built. As I stared at the thick stack of documents, I realized something important. I was no longer afraid of what would happen. I was only waiting for it to begin. And soon my sister would step directly into the trap she had spent months building for herself. 3 days before the anniversary party, I sat alone in my home office and read every page of the investigator's final report. The binder looked ordinary. Black leather, metal rings, a simple label on the front. Nothing about it suggested that it contained enough evidence to destroy 2 relationships and permanently alter an entire family. Liberty slept at my feet while I turned page after page. Hotel receipts, photographs, phone records, witness statements. By midnight, I had reached the final section. That was when I discovered something even more disturbing than the affair itself. The investigator had compiled transcripts from conversations Emily had shared with friends and co-workers. Most of them made my stomach turn. One woman recalled Emily saying, "Sarah doesn't deserve him." Another remembered, "If David had met me first, he'd have chosen me." But one statement stayed with me longer than all the others. A former co-worker quoted Emily as saying, "I've spent my entire life watching Sarah get everything. Maybe it's finally my turn." I stared at that sentence for a long time. Not because it surprised me, because it explained everything. This wasn't about love. It wasn't about David. It wasn't even about attraction. Emily wasn't trying to build something. She was trying to take something. There was a difference. A huge difference. People in love create. Jealous people destroy. And for the first time in my life, I saw my sister clearly. Not the version I wanted her to be. The version she actually was. The realization hurt more than I expected. Because grief isn't only about losing people. Sometimes it's about losing illusions. For years, I had convinced myself that Emily's selfishness was immaturity. That eventually she would grow up. Eventually she would find stability. Eventually she would stop competing with me. Instead, she had spent years nurturing resentment. Years convincing herself that my life belonged to her. The next morning I drove to Arlington National Cemetery. Whenever life became overwhelming, I went there. Some people find peace in churches. Others find it in nature. I found it among rows of white headstones. I parked my car and walked slowly through the quiet landscape. The air felt cool. The sky was gray. A gentle breeze moved through the trees. I stopped beside the grave of a friend I had lost years earlier overseas. Colonel James Warren, one of the finest officers I had ever known. For several minutes I stood there silently. Then I laughed softly. It surprised even me. Because suddenly the entire situation seemed absurd. I had survived combat deployments, rocket attacks, military investigations, national security crises, and somehow the thing threatening to break me was my own sister. The thought would have made James laugh. Eventually, I sat on a nearby bench. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to stop thinking emotionally. I started thinking strategically, the way the Army had trained me. Facts, objectives, options, outcomes. The facts were simple. David and Emily were having an affair. They believed I knew nothing. Emily planned to expose the affair publicly. The objective was equally simple. Protect myself. Preserve my dignity. Control the narrative. The outcome I wanted became obvious. Emily wanted a spectacle. I would give her one. Just not the version she expected. Over the next 72 hours, I prepared carefully. I met twice with the investigator. His name was Michael Reyes. Former law enforcement. Quiet. Professional. Meticulous. The kind of man who noticed details everyone else missed. We reviewed every scenario, every possibility, every reaction. "What if she changes her mind?" he asked. "She won't." "You sound certain." "I am." He studied me for a moment. "Because you know her. Because she's been planning this her whole life." He nodded slowly. I think he understood. The affair wasn't spontaneous. The public announcement wasn't spontaneous. Everything Emily did was driven by one thing: attention. And people addicted to attention rarely walk away from a stage. The day before the party, I received another unexpected piece of information. The investigator called shortly after noon. "I think you need to see this." His tone immediately caught my attention. An hour later, we met in a private conference room. Michael placed a folder on the table. Inside were several new photographs. I looked at the first one. Then the second. Then the third. My eyebrows rose. For the first time in months, I felt genuine surprise. Emily wasn't only seeing David. She had been involved with another man. Simultaneously. The timeline overlapped significantly. According to the investigator, the second relationship had been ongoing for nearly 6 months. I leaned back in my chair. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, Michael broke the silence. "There's more." He slid another document toward me. Laboratory paperwork, medical records, dates. I read everything carefully, then looked up. You're sure? As sure as I can be. I exhaled slowly. The irony was almost unbelievable. The woman planning to publicly humiliate me with a pregnancy announcement had no idea that the pregnancy itself would eventually expose her. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something close to confidence. Not revenge, not excitement. Confidence. Because the truth was stronger than any lie. And I had all of it. The next day arrived. The morning of the anniversary celebration. David kissed me goodbye before leaving to meet vendors at the venue. I watched him walk out the front door. 10 years. 10 years together. 10 years reduced to secrets and hotel rooms. Oddly, I didn't feel angry anymore. The anger had burned itself out weeks earlier. What remained was disappointment. The deep kind. The kind that settles quietly into your bones. That afternoon I dressed carefully. A navy evening gown. Simple pearl earrings. Minimal makeup. Professional. Elegant. Controlled. Exactly how I wanted to feel. As I prepared to leave, my phone buzzed. A message from Emily. Can't wait for tonight. It's going to be unforgettable. I stared at the screen, then smiled. She was right. It was going to be unforgettable. Just not for the reasons she imagined. By 6 o'clock, guests began arriving at the Chesapeake Bay Resort. Military officers, neighbors, friends, family, former colleagues. 300 people filled the ballroom. The atmosphere sparkled with celebration. Laughter echoed beneath crystal chandeliers. Champagne flowed freely. A jazz trio played near the stage. Everywhere I looked, people were smiling. No one knew a bomb was about to explode. At 7:30, I noticed Michael Reyes enter through a side door. Dark suit. Quiet demeanor. Completely forgettable. Exactly as planned. He took a seat near the back of the room. Our eyes met briefly. He gave the smallest nod. Everything was ready. Every document. Every photograph. Every witness statement. Every fact. The trap had been set. All that remained was for Emily to walk into it. And less than an hour later, she would stand in front of 300 guests, grab a microphone, and unknowingly destroy her own future. For a few seconds after Emily's announcement, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The ballroom seemed frozen in place. 300 people sat staring between my sister and my husband as if they were watching a car crash unfold in slow motion. Emily stood at the center of the dance floor, gripping the microphone with both hands. A triumphant smile spread across her face. She looked exactly like someone who believed she had finally won. My mother's eyes filled with tears. My father looked physically ill. Across the room, several of my military colleagues exchanged uncomfortable glances. David stood so abruptly that his chair crashed backward onto the floor. The sound echoed through the ballroom. "That's a lie." His voice cracked. His face had turned almost white. "Sarah, she's lying, I swear to God." Emily laughed. Actually laughed. "Really?" She tilted her head. "Do you want me to tell them about the Harbor View Inn?" David's expression collapsed. Then she continued. "Or maybe the conference in Richmond." A murmur spread through the crowd. People began whispering. Several guests turned toward me, waiting, expecting tears, expecting rage, expecting a public breakdown. Instead, I calmly stood up. I smoothed the front of my navy dress, adjusted the microphone in my hand, and smiled. "Thank you, Emily." The room immediately grew quiet. Confusion crossed her face. "What?" "Thank you." I looked around the ballroom. "Because if you're sharing the truth tonight, I suppose it's only fair that I share mine." For the first time all evening, uncertainty appeared in her eyes. David stared at me, his mouth slightly open. I continued. "The interesting thing is—" I paused. I already knew. The silence became absolute. Emily blinked. Once. Twice. Then laughed nervously. "No, you didn't." "Actually, I did." I turned toward the back of the ballroom. "Michael—" Every head in the room followed my gaze. A man in a dark suit slowly stood from a table near the rear wall. Several guests frowned. They didn't recognize him. Neither did my parents. Neither did David. And judging by Emily's expression, neither did she. Michael Reyes began walking toward the stage. His footsteps echoed softly across the polished floor. Emily's confidence visibly weakened. "Who is that?" I smiled. "My private investigator." The reaction was immediate. Gasps erupted throughout the ballroom. David's face drained of what little color remained. Emily looked as though someone had punched her in the stomach. Michael joined me near the stage. then calmly placed a thick black binder on the podium. The same binder I had spent weeks studying. The same binder containing 4 months of evidence. Michael opened it, then looked directly at Emily. "Good evening." Nobody laughed. Nobody spoke. The room remained completely silent. He began removing photographs, one by one. Large printed photographs. Hotel entrances. Restaurant parking lots. David and Emily holding hands. David and Emily